I like intro music.
I know.
Let's get it started.
Hey, everybody. It is our favorite day of the week, our new favorite day of the week. And it's Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And we're excited to, connect with you all this Sunday and talk a little bit about the status of recruiting, because I feel like we are all getting hit up with like, what is happening?
Yes. And yes. So
there's been a lot of pressure and a lot of confusion about different things that you're hearing. And so, we wanted to hop on and talk a little bit about what to expect in this recruiting process. And we're happy to address questions that you may have. We're doing a little bit of a format today, a little bit different of a format. It's a little bit more conversational. And so if you are a parent or a player that have joined us and you have a question, please don't hesitate to use that chat box and go ahead and send us a message, and we will be happy to address questions that you have. But before we do any of that, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction in case you don't know who we are. My name's Kara Hill. I'm also known as V-Ball Recruiter across social media, which is how most people know me. And I started my recruiting solutions 11 years ago. Throughout this amazing journey of being able to help all these different families and building relationships with college coaches, I was blessed to have these two women join me and come on board to help other families through the process. And so a little bit about us, we run a recruiting service. We help families with video editing and guidance counseling. We meet with people on a consistent basis to give you strategies and tips along the way to help you be successful in the process. And then we leverage our relationships with college coaches to be able to get better insight as to where you are on their list or their radar. And through all of this, we do a lot of educational webinars and recruiting tips that we post across social. And so you may have come across some of those along the way. We try and have as much fun as possible and shake things up. And I'm going to pass the baton on to Coach Sam.
Hi, everybody. Is there anybody who does not know who you are?
I think so.
It's
Maybe.
like very few, because you walk into a gym and it's like, oh, it's you. Oh, it's you. Oh, wait.
It's the lady with the red hat.
So
that's why I wear it.
No doubt.
Your red hat.
And you have red shoes now.
I do. Coach Sam got me Tory Burch red shoes. They are amazing. So
sweet.
You'll see us in Vegas. I'll be rocking them next weekend.
I like it. Well, now that we talked about her attire, so she looks, because she's always got to look the part. I am Coach Sam, and I was a college coach for 20 years. And I had the opportunity to meet Kara years ago. And we first met, I always like to share, finally at a Lone Star Classic qualifier. And she's like, let's go to dinner. I said, okay. And the rest is history, as they know it.
We bonded over food and adult cocktails.
We did. And then ever since then, anytime, are you going to be here? Are you going to be here?
Yeah. And then you kind of became my
we're always together. And then look, now almost 4 years later, we're always together as well. So, but yeah, I was a college coach, did a lot of other stuff as well. And thankful for this opportunity and to still be serving and giving back to the world of volleyball. And then this volleyball community is super small, as I like to say, because as Emily's going to introduce herself, Emily and I go way back as well from my time when I was at Rhodes in Mississippi State in the Delta region of USA Volleyball. That's where I know it's throwback. That's where we met. And then she became part of the fam. So Emily, take it away.
Yeah, hello, Coach Emily. I just joined back in mid-May. Super excited to be a part of this. As Sam said, we go way back, and thankfully for Sam, she introduced me to Kara about 3-ish years ago, and we've been friends ever since. And I was just very grateful that when I made the very tough decision of finishing my coaching college career that Kara called me out of the blue and was like, come join me. And I said, yes, please. But yeah, so I did just shy of 10 years of college coaching, anywhere from NAIA D2, D1. Just finished up at Fordham University in the Bronx, and I live currently in Denver, so I get to be remote and see these lovely ladies through a screen, unfortunately, but I get to see them in person, and I've learned a lot from this side of the recruiting stuff, going from coaching and recruiting kids to come to me. Now I get to help them spread their wings and go find their journey for the next, hopefully 4, not 5 or 6 years, but 4 years. So yeah.
One thing that I love about having your perspective, obviously just being fresh out of it, Sam's perspective, is that I feel that as we talk about these things, and today we're going to talk about, the status of recruiting, what we're all experiencing, families, just so the three of us between the three of us, we're reaching out to about 75 programs a week right now. And in doing that, we are obviously using our relationships that we all have with different coaches. Some of us have better relationships with coaches than others. And so we kind of meet on a consistent basis to figure out, who needs to take who, what do we need to do here in order to make progress. And I share that because as we get into the status of recruiting, there are trends that we've noticed, and we're going to talk about those. But we're also going to talk about, personal experiences individually as we've each talked to a variety of different schools, just different things that we're hearing. And hopefully that insight will either provide you some comfort, or maybe you're having a come to Jesus with what's happening and going, oh gosh, like I better modify and adjust either my strategy or what I'm doing. And so that's really the goal in today's presentation. We've noticed that coaches have not had a lot of turnover in the last 2 seasons. And so before we jump into the status in Division I recruiting, one thing that we've talked about internally is there's been a lot of turnover in administrators.
Yes, and it happens, I think, every week. There's 1 to 2 from the D1 standpoint. That's not even taking into account like D2, D3, NAIA, but it's happening. Yeah.
So these administrators are moving out of their position. And just to kind of give you an idea of what happens when the administrators move and new people come in, oftentimes, just like us having relationships, they have relationships. So they may have a new idea for who they want to bring in as a volleyball coach because they have a past experience with that person. So depending on where the contract is with that coach, if they have one, the coach may not get a contract renewed, or if they don't have a contract, then they may be out of a job. So we've talked internally a lot about, seeing that there's probably going to be a high turnover after this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's going to happen. The admin piece, I think, is a huge piece of it. I think there's some people that are just, a lot of the admins, a lot of them are retiring. There's some that have just said, I'm done. So new people coming in, which means there's kind of like a new regime, different thoughts, different philosophies. And also in terms of, coaching wise, like if you haven't been very successful, that piece, like where last year might have saved you, the reality is that it might not save you this year.
Yeah. If you're not winning, you're out of a job. And that's kind of the brutal, harsh reality of being in this college coaching position. And so, oftentimes we can be very harsh at certain times with specific clients as they have different aspirations to do different things, to just kind of bring that to light. Because I think sometimes, we look at the process, or we get frustrated with a coach, we're getting frustrated with some sort of message, maybe we want something to happen. And sometimes that's why I'm so grateful that, you know, you're both alongside to be able to share that insight, share that perspective, just to have a different, you know, set of eyes on things, because as parents or as players, you know, you don't necessarily approach the process that way. You just don't know what you don't know. And so it's nice to be able to share that other, you know, those other goggles, as we like to say. Emily, do you have anything you want to add on any of that before we hop into Division One?
No, I think the only thing to add is, you know, make sure that, you know, building these relationships with coaches, and as Karen and Sam said, there's a lot of turnaround. So you could build a relationship with a coach and then they could move to another institution. So, you know, always make sure that when you're building those relationships that you're continuing to not like burn a bridge in a way, or, you know, make kind of a fool of yourself. You're always kind of building that relationship because you never know what could happen in the future.
That's a really good point. We have a client that we worked with who Sam was recruiting at Mississippi State, actually. And another coach who also is a former coach at Mississippi State, who was at a neighboring conference, was recruiting this particular player. This particular player had chose Mississippi State. The program that she had said no to, she did it very eloquently. And 2 years later, he became her head coach. So it's really as we talk about this volleyball world being very small, it is really small. And so as you hear from coaches, you know, if there's a program that doesn't interest you, I would encourage you to send some sort of follow-up or initially have some form of a conversation. Maybe the needs don't add up, but it's really important that you do understand that you cannot afford to burn a bridge with anybody in this business, because we all know each other.
Yep.
So thanks for that point. Okay, we're going to hop into Division One recruiting. Whether you are a 2022, a 2023, or you are a 2024 on this call, the 2024's, just so you know, you are the next call. So you are a topic of conversation that is happening in these offices right now, and it is something that you need to be, you know, taking seriously. Your recruiting process needs to be a priority to you. 2022's, there are Division Ones that are still recruiting. There are still spots available. That is really important for you to know. The question is, it's about who's staying and who's going.
Yeah, I think that is a big point. You're also heading into, when you think about the D1 volleyball schedule, you have one more weekend of non-conference play. And then guess what? Conference is on. And that's like, as Emily's shaking her head, like when you start conference, it's like a new season. Because for a lot of people, your conference play matters more so than anything, especially if you're trying to go postseason to the NCAA. And so, you know, what's happening, and you start realizing as you start getting into conference play, where are you? Where do you fit? What are you missing? What do we need? What's not working? And so as Kara mentioned with the 22's, people are still actively recruiting for 22. They're still going to have needs after this season. And it's not always necessarily that they're going to go into this transfer portal at the end of the day either for it.
Athletes that stay are impacting scholarships. It is impacting budgets. So at the Division I level, one trend that we are seeing, the programs that are the tip top programs, the Baylors, the Minnesotas, the Pitts, you know, the Nebraskas, those programs, athletes are staying. 2, 3, 4 athletes from, you know, each class are potentially staying and wanting to, you know, continue to play. And I think that's really important for you to know as you're looking at what's out there. So if you are, as we call you, a special snowflake, if you are a special snowflake, if you are in that, you know, top 1% in the country, there is less turnover happening at those programs. There will always be coaching turnover, which will then create opportunity. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But, you know, if you're a player that's going through the process and you're hearing, I don't have 4 years for you. I may have 3 years. I may have 2 years. There's some consistency in that because there's a lot of people that just don't know, which, Sam talked a little bit about going into conference play. I now want to talk about mid-October being a significant time of year. And I'm going to let Coach Sam and Coach Emily talk about, as a college coach, what's going through your mind that time of year and what's happening with your players. And then families that are listening, it's important that you understand what's happening behind the scenes because it impacts your recruiting journey.
Yeah, I think we even touched upon this a little bit on the high school side of a couple weeks ago on our last Zoom about the grind is real. And when I say the word grind, I don't mean that as a negative connotation. Like, it's real, it's reality. And I always say the grind's on, like I'm grinding. That's because that's what we do. But it's real. And for this college season, especially a lot of the D1s, right? They had this spring, like a true spring season. And so there wasn't a lot of downtime. Now we're back full go into fall, which is awesome, but it's full go into season, school, you're traveling, and there's all this, like, there's still COVID concerns, like COVID's not going anywhere, unfortunately. And so a lot of teams are having to still struggle with, people have to be in quarantine, who can travel, who can't travel, etc. And, as I just mentioned, conference season is upon us. So it's like sort of a brand new season. Are you ready? You're trying to manage your kids, make sure that physically they can peak in November for whenever, if your conference has a conference tournament, to get ready for the NCAA tournament, as everybody's goal wants to go postseason. But the middle, like October, what does that bring? School, midterms, how are people doing in the classroom? That's as I see Emily's face, like, every week it was like I'm touching base when I was coaching like academics, like our academic advisor, like a weekly meeting, if not every other day, who's doing what's going on, how is everybody doing? And if not, I'm having meetings with players to be like, hey, awesome, or what's going on and what do we need to take care of right now? You're here for school. We got to take care of that. So managing that piece of it. There's some people that maybe they have stuff going on at home that we just don't know about. And so I think that October is just having check-ins with your players and just like, how are you? What's going on? Sometimes it becomes a little bit, as much as a coach, you're like, okay, volleyball, conference, scouting, let's get ready. Sometimes it's like taking that breather and making sure that everybody's good to go and doing something fun and a little bit relaxing and a little team bonding, which quite frankly, I've heard from a lot of people that are continuing to do that because of everything that happened with COVID and stuff. So it's managing that. Sometimes your players just come in, they need a snack, they just need to chill on the couch, and all of a sudden they just have a moment where they break down. And so you got to kind of close the door and be like, talk to me. What can I do? And you as a coach have to kind of remind that as you're in practice, like you kind of get a vibe. And sometimes maybe somebody didn't tell you something and you're thinking about what's going on. And then you might not know at practice, but then you find out after practice too. So, that communication piece, I think your radar is way more on in October and all that for sure. Just to make sure that everybody is really good to go, truly.
And I think the best thing a player could hear from coach is, hey, we're not having practice tomorrow. By that time, they're burnt out, especially as you said, like midterms. And when you're at a high academic institution, those midterms are everything. And yeah, super brutal. And unfortunately, it kind of hurts the coaches a little bit in the heart to give an extra day off because they want to be in the gym, they want to be training, but you got to give those days off sometimes, or you got to do a yoga session, or you got to do a rollout session, or just something light. And that was like a blessing in disguise for them because they were like, oh, thank you for giving us that time and that extra just breather. But yeah, Sam, you're right. Like that was the time to do an extra check-in. I wasn't fortunate enough to be a head coach, but as an assistant, I would have my check-ins with my specific positions. So I was a middle and a libero coach, and I would get to check in with those guys at least on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, just kind of depending on their schedules as well. I never wanted to do too much where they're like, okay, I have another meeting, or I have another this or another that. So I would kind of just, let them come to me and make sure that they knew that I was always there. And if they needed anything, that they could always call, or they could always stop by and say, hey, can we go grab some coffee? Because I just need to vent away. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So one thing I want to point out as you're hearing both of them talk about their experience from the coaching world is one thing you're starting to hear is them being tuned in, listening to their players, talking to their players. Now there's a certain level of sensitivity we're hearing from a lot of coaches. They're not allowed to put any pressure on their players to ask whether they're coming back or not. But at this time of year, you are also going to have some indication on maybe if you think somebody is going to hit the portal, if you think somebody is going to quit volleyball altogether, if you think somebody wants to go home, all of those things I think are things that start to pop in your head. And so the reason that I wanted to point that out is that as families that are going through the process, you need to be very aware of what's happening from the coach's perspective so that it can make an impact in how you're running your marketing campaign at that time. Because sometimes in recruiting, it could be the right place at the right time. I can't tell you how many players start the process and drop the ball with the program. And, as they go back and circle back, sometimes a coach will say, gosh, I wish I would have heard from you 3 weeks ago because, we had a spot available, but we decided to go with somebody who, stayed in consistent communication. Or as a family, you might be caught off guard. You might see that, a program committed a player who told you they were done with recruiting, and then all of a sudden their needs changed and that player happened to be at the right place at the right time. I think all those things are really important to point out and help you understand. We had a question that came in, and it's not totally on topic, but it's sort of on topic, about the time commitment. And since you both have coached Division I, you've coached Division II and NAIA, Sam's coached Division III. I thought maybe from a time commitment perspective, if you can just kind of share what that looked like at the different programs that you were at as coaches.
Sure. D1, and you can chime in because we've both done the D1 piece, but I like to, joke, but it's really true. During the fall, it is eat, sleep, volleyball, school, repeat. Now you can change the order of the priorities, so don't get me wrong.
You have a 6 a.m. practice or a
but in reality, that's it. You're doing that 6 out of 7 days a week. That's including your travel. You have an off day. I tell you, when I was at Eastern Illinois, I did love the fact that we had Sundays off. Even if playing Fridays, Saturdays sometimes could be brutal. But I really felt that Sunday was great that they had a whole off day in no school and all that. When I was at Mississippi State, a lot of times we would play, like Friday, Sunday, which again, like great because you had that day off in between. But if Monday was the day off from practice, which it was for the girls, it just, wasn't for us as a staff. I don't know if there is a thing as an off day, but for the girls, it wasn't. And I know that they would have liked to have just been able to have like a total off day just to recoup, enjoy, lounge, watch Netflix, whatever the case is, do their homework, obviously. But so that's it. And in the springtime, it's different on like the calendar of 1 year in an 8-hour versus a 20-hour segment, which for those of you, if you're wondering what that means, the 20-hour segment basically means you're back in full team practice. An 8-hour segment means you're spending a lot of time with strength and conditioning, and then you're in individuals for a couple hours of that week. A lot of times you'll have weekends off in the spring, minus when you get to play your 4 dates of competition, if you're playing over the weekend instead of the weekday. But it's school, volleyball, eat, sleep, repeat. And the expectation is that you're going to make that a priority. That's what you're there for. I'm gonna have you go ahead and add Division I, Emily, your experience from Division I, and then we'll jump into Division II, and then we'll go to Division III. So if you want to chime in anything outside of that, especially being at a high academic Division I school,
I think that's relevant for families that are looking at high academic Division I programs, so Ivy League type institutions, which Fordham clearly, is a top academic school. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our athletes were really, really good at being organized. Like we hardly ever had to stay on them, which is great. And I think that's kind of goes hand in hand with, high schoolers who want high academic, they're usually pretty organized. So we were very lucky. Obviously you have your couple who you kind of need to stay on, but for the most part, they're in the library studying, they're in the locker room studying, they're on the bus studying, they're creating even their own study hall when we're on trips. Like we didn't, especially by the time I left, we didn't really have to incorporate study hall time because they were already doing it, because they knew they had to stay on top of their school. They had to stay on top of their academics, especially if they wanted to have the career that they wanted to have after volleyball, and to be eligible and to be able to play and have that GPA, cumulative GPA of the team goal. So we always had a team GPA goal at the end of the year. So they always really strived to do that. And that was great. But, as Sam said, they loved going into the city. They loved thrift shopping, going to get some mac and cheese, just things like that, where when they had those days off, they definitely took advantage of it. They more did active resting instead of just stay in bed all day, because they knew that by the time, if they had a full Sunday off by Monday, they'd be like, oh, we regret just laying around and not doing anything. And we could tell the ones who were laying around all day, because then they would be coming in stiff and just kind of groggy. But yeah, it was an interesting experience going from coaching at Michigan for a year, and Michigan is also somewhat of a high academic institution, but also going to an even higher academic institution, but a mid-major D1. And I felt like there was a little bit more freedom at Michigan, but they were still very on top of what they needed to do to be successful in the classroom and in the gym, like on the court. So it was definitely a similar dynamic, but you could just tell the level of stress was just different, and it was just a little more, I guess, wild at Fordham than it was at Michigan.
And then at D2, can you talk a little bit about the hours and the commitment in Division II?
Yeah, so they were pretty similar, but they definitely don't have as much requirements, coming in, especially in the spring. There was only maybe like one or two games. And that also depends on the coach and kind of what they decide to schedule. So you can have one game, you can have two games, 2 weekends, whatever you wanted. But for the most part, everyone that they took their time during the spring to really focus in on internships or studying abroad maybe, or going and doing some other things towards academic side of things. And we really didn't train too much during the spring. We still would have those moments where we were in the grind, as Sam has said, and it's definitely not as long as D1, and kind of the same thing that Sam will explain, like in D3 and NAI, you really kind of don't have much of a spring, but you kind of have a little bit of a spring season during that time. But it definitely is more of a, hey, how can you focus in on what your academics need? And especially during that time, they overload their academics. They take the harder classes. They take more classes if they need to. So instead of your typical 12 or 14 hours or however many you would typically take in a semester, maybe you'll do 20 hours, or maybe you do 21 hours, or whatever you think you could handle during that spring. Definitely at the D2 level, you can handle that a little bit better than at the D1 level.
And then Division III.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing to the D2 piece. The NCAA was intentional about legislation a few years ago about really making it student athlete friendly. So across the board in all sports, like they have strict guidelines as to when they can start, their traditional season versus their non-traditional season, and very intentional about that. So for their student athletes in general. So, at the D3 piece, Emily made a great point about the class schedules in the spring. is that, when I was all my years at Rhodes, a lot of kids, if they had to take a crazy class, a seminar or something like that, or a crazy lab, they would really wait until the spring to take that, if at all possible, because we weren't going to miss any school for volleyball at all. We got to play one date in Division III. That hasn't changed. And so they could go through class and they, weren't going to miss anything for travel. When we were in a league for the majority of my time, where we did miss some schools because of, travel schedules and things like that, because we did get to fly once a year, et cetera. I would say that during the fall, 6 out of 7 days a week, it's still volleyball. So it's managing that piece. And I will tell you that I always felt like, I'm a very organized, regimented. I like my schedule. I totally admit that. And I think a lot of kids like having that. And, as Emily said, there's always a one or two you got to stay on, and haven't had that. And so you got to kind of get them on that bus, so to speak. But I would always, my Rhodes players, without a doubt, when it came to spring season, would say, Coach, I go, how's everything? Good. I said, school, I'm okay. And I said, that doesn't sound good. And they're like, in fall, we know what's going on. We have your schedule. I know what I got to do. And it's boom, 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 boom. In the springtime, I have a little more leeway. And I said, and you're kind of slacking, aren't you? And they're like, yes, it's easier to do that. And I'm like, and then you don't feed us as much. So I have to spend more money on food if they were living off campus, which I would laugh about. So, I think generally players like having that, that schedule to know, like, this is what's going on, boom, even though when it gets tedious at times, and you get a little tired and a little fatigued from it, it's just helpful to get everything done. So at Division III in the spring, 15 practice opportunities and 1 data competition. At Rhodes, we used to do it like a 5-week segment, 3 practices a week, figure out that play day somewhere in there. And the cool thing is we actually would go play at like a D2 or a D1 and enjoy that and have that opportunity. And then you're also relying on your captains, your leaders, whatever you refer to them as, to make sure that they're having open gyms and they're getting the players into the gym as well on their own, outside of my control, quite frankly. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. When you get kids invested and they're willing to do that, then you're going to see that fruition. And for the record, that's a D3 thing. It's a D2 thing. It's a Division I thing as well, and an NAIA thing as well. So, but when kids would go study abroad at Rhodes, a lot of times junior year, when were they going? Spring semester, obviously. The Division I world, most places studying abroad doesn't necessarily, it's not an option.
Till senior year.
Yeah.
There's a couple of schools that allow you to study abroad spring, junior year, but for the most part, you're getting paid potentially. If you are on scholarship, the mentality is this is your first career. And so you need to treat it as though you're getting paid $50,000, $60,000, $75,000 a year. And the coaches expect that kind of commitment.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a sacrifice to play at the next level. But hopefully there was a question that had come in. So I had wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time addressing the time commitment to give you that idea. Getting back to on topic here, about status. We talked a little bit about Division I and some of the trends, some of the feedback that we're getting. If you're coming in late, you need to know that it's not too late to get recruited, whether you're a 22 or a 23 at the Division I level. There is definitely recruiting happening. There are options that are out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about if you're not hearing anything. We're gonna talk about that after we wrap up Division II and Division III. In Division II, we talk internally here. We mostly talk to Division I and Division III coaches because a lot of our clientele is looking at either higher academic schools, or every once in a while we have a few blue chip players that are looking at the Power 5 schools, and so we have to be in touch with those programs to get an understanding as to what's happening in those programs. Division II schools that I've come across and that I've personally been talking to, I feel like a lot of those kids, or the feedback that I'm getting, even from players that have reached out to me on Insta, I've had, I want to go into the portal, but I want to see if I can, transfer and go to someplace for my 5th year. Some people have said that they wanted to go play beach from Division II, and others have said they have wanted to make an attempt to try and go into the D1 world and play a season of Division I. They had played Division II. Now they wanted to try and play at the Division I level. It is not appearing that there is as many players in Division II at this time that are planning to stay. That seems to be pretty consistent from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so far that's what I've been hearing as well. So
It's,
subject to change.
anything can change. But surprisingly, you would think that in Division III that you would see more of a transition. And we're finding the top academic D3 schools, the kids are deferring enrollment and they are planning on staying.
They are.
And so programs are not taking, they would in a normal recruiting cycle at a high academic Division III school, really across the board at all Division III schools, but the high academic, the high level Division III volleyball programs across the board consistently. We saw JJ over the weekend.
Mhm.
You saw Jenny at Emory,
Claremont McKenna.
deferred enrollment. That is, we went to
A lot.
a D3 tournament on Friday and it was deferred enrollment. They want to stay and play. And so I think that to me, when you have,
Yeah.
these institutions, I think to me, that was the biggest surprise.
Yeah, and it's common. I mean, we're hearing that, like you said, not just one or two, but multiple across the entire country on that. So
Yeah, it's not even like a geographic thing. It really,
yeah,
I think the programs too that, have a shot at a national championship. I think, JJ at Trinity in Texas, holy cow, is just, we watched some really good Division III volleyball. It was great competition between Trinity and Emory.
Yeah.
It was pretty spectacular, but I think it's interesting, these high academic schools and mainly the ones that we're hearing. And I talked to Michelle Benoit at John Carroll too. She didn't seem to have as many kids interested in staying there in Ohio, around Cleveland, but all the top D3s,
yeah.
Tufts didn't have
For
anybody
example.
leave, Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
So, they may only have one spot available in this 2022 class. In 2023, things could potentially change. But again, I think that it depends on the level of commitment of the players and how well they're doing. And so I think that as time goes on, we will see less and less players that decide to stay. But I do think that because of, what a negative experience and the toll that it took on the mental health of that age group in particular, high school students and college age students, COVID was significant in how it impacted their mental health. And that is why the college coaches are not able to press their players. They have all had very strict feedback from administrators to say, this is not a topic that you are able to push among your players because everybody's concerned about the mental health of these young adults. And so I think because we're still so close to COVID, we're still going through COVID, I think that's one of the reasons that we're going to see some lingering. But I do expect as time goes on, and as they have an actual season and you go through, as they've just described, the grind of the season, you then start to get a little tired, as you all can tell.
Yeah, when you haven't necessarily been through it for a while either. There's a lot of schools, Claremont McKenna, for example, even as a coaching staff, people just getting back to offices recently.
Mhm.
You've been working from home, been able to hang out with your family, like all that stuff. You're still working, but it's different when you're having to get in your car. And if you have whatever your commute is to the office and then back and then stuck in offices or meetings and all that, it's a different type of grind, quite frankly. Yeah.
I agree. What do you think, Emily? Any feedback on any of that?
No, that's spot on. I know going through coaching through the initial part of the pandemic and either being at home or oh, well, we're shut down for 2 weeks. And then we have to revamp a schedule, or, oh, we have to cancel a game because of COVID. And then we try and, contact other schools to see if we can possibly, get in to, play them for, kind of like a rematch, or, just something. It was just very stressful. And, I'm kind of like Sam, where I kind of need like that schedule, that regimen. I thrive off that. And when there's just this hat and everyone shakes it up and they're like, here's your schedule for the day. And I'm like, wow, like this, I can't even imagine these athletes going through that of, not knowing what's happening, or training, and you're prepping and you're doing all these things like scouting reports to get ready for these teams. And then all of a sudden, like day of even, they're just like, oh, nope, not playing. And then, yeah, going from being at home, during all of this, not knowing when you're going to go back. It was almost terrifying. It was like, at first it was like, oh, this is kind of nice working from home, like just kind of doodling around. And then it gets to a point where you're like, okay, when is this actually going to end? When am I going to get back to normal? And it was just wild doing that for, 14, 15 months. And then, kind of having a season last year. And then this year is hopefully like way more normal. It kind of seems like they've started normal now. But yeah, I would not put anyone through that again. As student athlete and as coaches, it was tough for sure.
So I think, as we'll probably look to do another topic just like this as we continue to get more feedback, definitely through the season. I want to see how things change and evolve, and look at, how we can touch on this again. If you're a 22 or a 23, if you haven't started your process, you need to get on it, because you need to start creating a momentum and start figuring out what it is that you want. And if you're a 24, you need to start the process, because as we talked about earlier, you're the next call. And so I want to open this up. If there's any questions that any of you have, please don't hesitate to either put it in the chat box, or you can drop a message in the Q&A as well. We'd be happy to address a question there. I want to talk a little bit about, especially this 22 class and 23 class. If you've been emailing coaches and you're only getting negative responses, or it's a goose egg, if you are reaching out to schools and you're not hearing from anyone, and I'm talking not reaching out to 3 to 5 schools, if you are running a campaign where you are reaching out to coaches and you are not hearing from anyone, that tells us a lot. That tells us that you're either aiming too high, your content's not very good, your video may be an issue, or you may not have one, in which case you're not going to get a response. That's going to go in the trash. There are things that tells us. And so it's very, very important that you do your due diligence and really start to understand the importance of running a marketing campaign. As we've come off COVID, some college coaches got to go out for one tournament. They went out to nationals. The Georgetown coach got hired and then came to Las Vegas and got to recruit at nationals, having not had it to recruited for 2 years. So it's crazy, like, to think about how important it is to run this campaign, because the college coaches that got out, they actually didn't get to see a whole lot. Think about it. The dead period went all the way through till May. It opened up in June. So coaches got to see players in June and first week of July at nationals. And then the only other opportunity that they've seen people, if they've traveled to a high school event, possibly, and some have, but some haven't wanted to take the risk with COVID. And then there has been summer camps. If you were blessed and you had the opportunity to go to a camp, you made an impression, maybe you got some feedback there, but that's why we're telling you how important it is to really run this campaign and to be taking a proactive role in this process. Because they really haven't had a whole lot of time to see a lot of people.
Yeah, the D1 recruiting calendar was gnarly for them. And so, I mean, we joke that we saw way more volleyball than the whole rest of the world in general, which was true, because we were out and about. The Division II coaches, I think that, you know, those that were able to go out because their institutions allowed them, there were some that did an amazing job and took full advantage of it. But there were still a lot of Division II, a lot of NAIA coaches, a lot of JUCO coaches, Division III coaches who could not go out and recruit. Maybe they could locally if they're in an area where it's worth it for them to go recruiting, but there's some that are not able to. And so that whole Orlando, AAUs, Vegas for nationals for a lot of people was truly the first time that they were out in a very, very long time for that reason, and did not have recruiting legs, by the way.
We got a question about understanding the quiet period. What does the quiet period mean? One thing that is really important about this question, they asked, when will they be able to talk to you if that's the case? A quiet period means no off-campus recruiting, but it does not mean that you or the college coach have to be quiet at all. You can talk on the phone, you can exchange emails. If you're in a 2022 or 2023 recruiting class and the quiet period impacts Division I schools. So you can talk to anyone at any time. There's definitely some confusion over the quiet period and the dead period. The dead period means they can't do any in-person evaluations, conversations, anything. So if your daughter was to go to a school during the dead period, the coach would not be able to meet with you, talk with you, even acknowledge that you're there. They can during the quiet period. So the quiet period means no off-campus recruiting, but a college coach can host a clinic during a quiet period, and many do. We will see a lot of those, I think, in January, unless there's restrictions with COVID with certain institutions that don't want people on campus. But I think we're going to see a lot of clinics in January. And so during a quiet period, you can actually get on campus, you can meet with the coaches, and you can do a clinic.
That's correct.
We were hoping to see clinics during the fall. There had been some college coaches that had talked about wanting to host clinics during the fall, but I think a lot of administrations, it seems like, have put the kibosh on that. And really it's because they don't want to bring people from an outside area onto these campuses, into these institutions, especially as COVID is still an issue. So I feel like there's not really any opportunity during the fall like I thought there was going to be.
Yeah, I think that there's just a safety first piece that's definitely coming into play. I mean, I know of one school that was hosting a tournament, D2 school hosting a tournament this weekend. They couldn't play because of COVID, but they still had the tournament and the other schools got to play, which was great because, I mean, big picture, they didn't want those schools to not play that weekend. That would have hurt them, but the host team could not play because of COVID.
It's very upsetting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that wraps us up on this Sunday evening. We are looking forward to connecting with you all next week. We will plan to reach out and follow up with you, but thank you for joining us. Emily, thanks for joining us a few states away.
Yeah.
And we look forward to connecting with you all soon. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.